Back in 1943, in Rjukan, Norway, something happened that would change everything. On a raw February night high in the Telemark Plateau, a handful of lightly armed men slipped across the snow with the look of ordinary skiers and the purpose of men on a suicide mission. They were Norwegian commandos, trained in Britain by the Special Operations Executive, and by then Europe was a map of occupation and urgency. Intelligence, much of it from a Norwegian scientist named Leif Tronstad, who had worked on heavy water before the war, had painted a chilling possibility. Nazi Germany was pursuing a nuclear program, and the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork produced heavy water, a rare moderator that could make a reactor, and perhaps a bomb, possible. That knowledge turned a quiet mountain factory into a pivot on which the future might tip. The story did not begin that night. Months earlier, British engineers had tried a blunt instrument, Operation Freshman, a glider-borne assault in November 1942 that ended in disaster when the aircraft crashed and survivors were executed. Meanwhile, a small advance party, called Grouse, had been dropped onto the plateau to act as eyes and a refuge. The failed Freshman sharpened the approach. Surreptitious, surgical, and Norwegian-led would be the next attempt. On 27th to 28th February 1943, Joachim Ronneberg led a six-man team across ice and wind to the red concrete bulk of Vemork. They came down a ravine, scaled a cliff beneath the plant, and entered a seemingly ordinary service door by crawling through a snowdrift and a drainage pipe. Inside the hydroelectric complex, the air smelled of oil and electricity. Heavy water electrolysis cells hummed behind thick doors. The saboteurs moved with mechanical calm. They tied skis and packs to rafters, worked quickly to avoid patrols, and set explosive charges where production cells and piping concentrated the precious D2O. In less than an hour, the charges ripped through machinery and kilograms of heavy water spilled and evaporated. The facility's capacity was shattered. There were no dramatic firefights. The drama was quieter. Timed charges, whispered commands, the click of detonators in cold palms. Then came the escape, a white nightmare of mountains and patrols. The team split up and skied alone across the Hardangervidda toward Sweden. Some walked days with raw feet and frozen faces. They evaded capture, scrounged food from isolated cabins, and finally crossed an international border into safety. The operation had cost few lives that night and accomplished much. Heavy water production was set back months, perhaps years. But the Allied worry did not end in Telemark. Germany tried to restore output. Repositories of heavy water were moved. Shipments became a target. In February 1944, Norwegian resistance fighters sank the ferry SF Hydro on Lake Tinn, preventing a shipment of remaining heavy water from reaching Germany. A grim decision that cost civilian lives, but illustrated the moral depth of a covert war against a possible catastrophe. The conspiracy at the heart of the Telemark saga was not a cloak-and-dagger myth, but a technical, nationalistic race, a mix of German scientific ambition, industrial supply lines, and the real fear among the Allies that a bomb in Nazi hands would be decisive. British codebreakers, Norwegians in exile, scientists like Tronstad, and SOE operators all fit together into a patient, dangerous campaign to sever that supply chain. What makes Telemark an adventure is not only the cliffside infiltration and the ski-bound escapes, but the scope of calculation behind every choice. A tiny team dismantling an industrial program that could have changed the course of the war. The success of Operation Gunnerside, the name given to the commando raid, became a touchstone. It delayed the German nuclear effort, boosted Allied morale, and became one of the most celebrated acts of resistance in occupied Europe. Years later, survivors would recall the sharp winter nights, the smell of metal and snow, and the cold, precise work of men convinced that a few explosives and a lot of courage could tilt history. In a war of empires and ideologies, the Telemark raid remains a human-sized adventure that altered the balance. A reminder that sometimes the most consequential battles are fought by a small band on a frozen plateau under the indifferent stars.